This is a discussion by and for online English teachers and coaches,
We're talking about the ups and downs of teaching online,
of entrepreneurship,
our students,
and our experiences
and yours.
in the digital teaching landscape. I'm Paul.
I'm Andrea.
Grab a coffee.
Let's start the Staff Meeting Podcast. It's a popular time for language proficiency prep. So I'm prepping students for CELPIP. And
for those of you who are listening who are not familiar with CELPIP, can you describe it? What is CELPIP?
Now I'm on the spot. It's an acronym, and it's the Canadian English Language Proficiency Index Program?
I think so.
Okay.
That final P is, I think, program.
Yeah. So it's different to IELTS, where IELTS is more an international proficiency test produced in Britain. And CELPIP is developed at UBC here in Vancouver. So it's very Canadian context proficiency test that people need to take to get their PR or immigration. And also people who don't have, I guess, a university degree, but are pursuing real estate license or an immigration consultant license, they need to take the CELPIP also.
Okay.
So when
it's
it comes
interesting.
to,
So
yeah,
not an academic test, right?
No, not at all. It's a proficiency test to evaluate the students' communication skills in everyday situations at work or in social life. So it encourages a contextual knowledge of the culture of Canada and the way people express themselves in this context, and the kind of reading that you would do in online or in newspapers, and situations you find yourself in at work. And yeah. So I quite like prepping students for it because it's not academic. And so it really draws on my background in theater. So it's great to be able to use those tools to help students feel more comfortable and confident in these productive skills of speaking and writing.
And how do those students find you? I know there's a CELPIP website. Do they just look on their website and you're listed among options?
I'm on a prep list on their website, and word of mouth. That's how I'm getting most of my clients, my students.
That's great.
Yeah. So it's been great. I have a full roster going currently. And I have, I was talking to you before, we were talking about students. Well, we always talk about our students. And I have a good batch, really engaged. It really makes such a huge difference when you have engaged students.
Yeah. What does that look like? What does engaged mean when they come to you? Does it mean they're doing their homework? Does it mean they're just showing up to the lessons? What's involved with engagement for you? What do you require of them?
Showing up can be great. But then as soon as they show up and I see them online, I can see that they're actually not engaged and they're not really here. It's challenging for CELPIP students because they work all day. And then the only time they can prep is in the evenings, and they're tired and they need to make dinner. They need to take care of the kids. So it really requires a commitment. So when I have engaged students, I'm really in awe of them, super proud of them that they're taking the time to do their homework, because that is it. That's a huge element, is to be able to do the work, because I want to make my classes efficient in terms of helping them. So I don't want to sit around and wait for them to write something.
Right.
So in our classes, I ask their homework is to write or record a speaking, and then we go over them and I give them direct feedback in our class.
That's great.
Yeah.
Just in terms of full disclosure, I myself grade CELPIP tests.
Yes. And we
So you and
don't
I are on.
talk to each other. We really are quite aware of that line.
Yeah.
And yeah.
It would be a conflict of interest for me if I were to help students prepare for the CELPIP test, knowing that I'm going to evaluate
Yeah.
tests and potentially there's a system in place so that I don't end up with someone's from my region test taking. But the bottom line is it's my responsibility not to fall into conflict of interest. So I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I work with general writing students who want to improve their writing, not necessarily for CELPIP.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, if you improve your writing in general, you have a better chance of passing a CELPIP or an IELTS or anything else.
Absolutely.
But often when I read some of the written work, I feel like I wish I could help the students. I've said to you this to you before, because I see the need for a lot of help.
Mm-hmm.
There are times when someone can produce excellent English sentences, but maybe they can't assemble a coherent idea in a paragraph or with any complexity, and that will hurt them. So I feel for the students trying to pass this test because there's a lot at stake for them, right? This is for immigration, for work, not just to get into school like IELTS might be, right?
The stakes are high. It's life-changing when they pass the test. And a lot of them end up taking the test more than once. And it's costly. So there's quite an investment, time-wise and money-wise. And I've noticed, and we've talked about this too, where students come to me after having done the test 3 or 4 times, spent the money on each of those tests, and then they decide to get prep and invest the money in the prep time. I wish there was some great big sign out there that said, don't take the test until you've prepped. Because it's not only about language proficiency in terms of demonstrating that you're fluent or that you speak the language. There's a pressure element to it as well. So it's really about practicing performing under stress. So there's a lot of that we do in my class also, is time management and how to deal with the anxiety of that.
And let's talk about students for a minute. What kind of students? Are they of a kind when they come to you for help? Let's say not just in CELPIP training, but in general, when they come to you for help with language and they seek your coaching. Who are these people? Who are your students, Andrea?
There's a variety of people. If I was to generalize, I would say that they are people who feel like their English, quote unquote, is not good enough. And they really want support. They really want to know they need to build their confidence speaking in these everyday situations. So I get people who really want to practice and get some validation really from me. That's what it ends up being in the end. In fact, I had a funny story this morning. A student shared with me, and I asked if I could share it with others, and he said, "Go ahead." We had a big laugh. My student is an architect from Brazil, and when he first came to Canada, he was a waiter at a restaurant in Vancouver. And I mean, the guy has such, really admire his, this is one of my really engaged students. I admire his strength, I guess, or his willingness to be uncomfortable, being comfortable with being uncomfortable, really. He was a waiter. He didn't really have the, advanced fluency. But he went up to a table and he was taking an order, and the person said, "I would like Caesar, please." And he said, "Okay." Then he was confused. He thought, what an odd thing to ask for, but I'm new. I don't know this culture. I don't know why he might need this. So he went into the back office and found a pair of scissors, put it on the tray and came back to the table and said, "Here you go." And the guy said, "Why are you giving me scissors?" He said, "See, you said scissors." And he said, "No, a Caesar, like a Caesar salad, or maybe it was a Caesar drink." And
Right.
it was a genuine like mistake in hearing, and just the confusion of being in a new culture. Why is he asking for scissors? But
Maybe it's
anyway,
what they do here.
it was quite funny. So then we got into that very difficult pronunciation part for Portuguese speakers in English, is the E and the I sound. It's very, very challenging to teach it, let alone produce it as an English speaker from another
But
language.
isn't it great, though, that he's got this experience that provides a context for him in his memory forever of
Yes.
why it's necessary? Because sometimes you teach a student something or explain something to them, and they'll say, "Why do we do that? In my language, we don't. We just blah, blah, blah." Fine, your language belongs to another language. It belongs to another culture. It has its own reasons for being the way it is that are completely unrelated to the reasons English has certain things. And but if you have a real context, you can see why it's important.
Yeah.
Why we need the two words, why we need the two different pronunciations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes they just don't know that a second word exists.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then of course the Caesar situation has, it's completely the wrong, he heard it in the wrong way, but then the different definitions of Caesar.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was
It's great.
a very, it was a great example for me to share with my other students that this guy is willing to go out there and just
Yeah.
learn by doing, because he will never make that mistake again. And it's a willingness. And that's what I teach in my class. This is all about the confidence building, is just do it, do the language, not
Yeah.
just speak it, but do it. So it's a holistic type of thing. That's what we do as well. It's really a coaching. We talked about this before too, this kind of balance between being a teacher and a coach in this online English teaching world.
What's interesting too about that example, I think, is that when students are hesitating to use their language and not willing to be uncomfortable, they have fears about it, right? Oh, what if I this? What if I that? And they're imagining a worst case scenario, right? Well, what you've just described is a pretty worst case scenario. Basically doing something publicly in a restaurant, at work, when you're in the spotlight, right? A waiter in a restaurant is standing up, everyone's seated, you're in the spotlight.
Yeah.
What could be more embarrassing? But nothing bad happens. Everyone enjoys it. Everyone gets a kick out of it. The patron has a funny story to tell. I'm sure they forgive you.
Of course. They all laughed.
What is the bad thing that's going to happen if you make a language mistake?
Yeah.
Why fear it? There's nothing, if there was something I fear in another language, it's being embarrassed publicly. Well, that guy was embarrassed publicly and it still wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
Oh, you feel flush for a moment. Big deal.
Yeah.
Move on. Now you've learned something brilliant and you have a great story to tell.
That's life. It's not all, it's painful. It's different levels and degrees of pain.
And the same thing could happen in your own language for different reasons.
Well, it happened to me in England. Years ago, I was at a bar and I went up to the barkeep and asked for a port. And he said, "What?" And it was very loud. And I said, "1 port, please." And he said, "I don't know." And I kept repeating, "Port, port." And then I said, "A port." And he went, "Oh, all right then." Now, I don't know if he was being
Right.
But when I changed my pronunciation, then
there was recognition for him.
And that helps me as a teacher, because I often say to my students, this is what the English listener will expect to hear. So saying a word the way the culture will expect to hear it will be different in Canada than England. So I'll say water here, but over there they expect to hear water. So that's that cultural competency element that's attached to language learning. Good communication skills have an awareness of that.
Yeah. Not going to another country and expecting them to conform to your idiosyncratic language.
Yeah.
Like, why don't they understand what I'm saying? No, the onus is on you to have some cultural awareness of the place you're in and adjust accordingly.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to adopt that accent, but to be aware that they may hear things in a different way and they may expect things differently.
Yeah.
That's a great lesson. That's travel is so great.
Yeah. And that's kindness too, right? I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as well, is kindness on both sides, the listener and the speaker. Because, this attitude towards people who come to Canada and they don't speak English or they speak broken English. Over the years, I've really gained such a huge respect for people who try, and they are trying. It sounds quote unquote broken, which I don't really like that expression anymore. But they speak more languages than I do.
Right.
That they're communicating and trying, and I respect that. And if I can help in any way, I will.
And often those people judging their quote unquote broken English, those people judging them aren't necessarily the most erudite, perfect English speakers either.
Who is perfect?
Who is? Yeah. And why should we expect it? That's what I love about
language. That's what I love about it too, is that it's ever evolving. It's always changing. I never Googled anything, 15 years ago. I can't remember when Google came on the scene, but language is ever evolving. Like, it's
a negotiation.
Yeah.
When you're in a conversation with someone, you're putting communication out there, even let's say between you and I.
Yeah.
And there's a feedback loop. It isn't a given that you will understand 100% of what I say or vice versa. So we're always in negotiation about, okay, our intended meaning or the picture we're trying to paint, right? It's just more of a challenging negotiation for someone for whom the language is not their native language.
Yes.
And we have to be patient with that. We have to be patient with each other in general to communicate. Even if we're peers, linguistic peers, we have to be patient and compassionate, because that's listening, right? That's listening to each other and trying to negotiate the language to get at what their idea is.
Yeah.
It's not always 100% clear with language, even for native speakers among each other. That's what we're struggling to do. It drives me nuts, for example, I play the role of grammar detective in my live show, but people will say to me sometimes like, oh, I made a mistake, please don't, arrest me. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. I'm not a grammar cop.
Yeah.
I'm not hounding you and trying to correct everything you say that's incorrect. That's not what I'm interested in doing. I'm interested in analyzing language as it's used. If you make mistakes, I'm not talking about when I'm working with a student. That's different. They expect correction and feedback. But in daily life, people make mistakes around me all the time, native speakers included. I'm not out there correcting everybody. Like, who the hell am I to correct anybody? I make mistakes, right? That's not good conversation. That's not compassionate negotiation.
That's a conversation stopper.
Yeah. Compassionate negotiation and conversation is when you're allowing the person to work through what they're trying to say. I often make mistakes. For example, there's a common one that native speakers make. Maybe you've done this, where we'll start with an empty subject like there or it. Then we'll proceed. This happens in a split second, but then we'll proceed to the verb conjugation. We'll say, there is. But in that moment, our idea often changes, and then the object becomes plural. Well, it's
Yeah.
too late to change the verb. You just uttered it.
Yeah.
So a mistake I often make is there is many people in this, many problems with that, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's because we're speaking faster than we can basically think and assemble the sentence.
Mhm.
And we're native speakers making that error
Yeah.
because it unfolds in time, word by
Mhm.
word. It happens very quickly, but your brain is making decision. It's like laying bricks, right? First one word, then another, then another.
Mhm.
How can we expect, if we can't expect ourselves to be flawless with that process, we certainly can't expect.
Well, that's the thing. Flawless, I guess, would be more of an expectation in writing than
Yeah,
speaking, because speaking is so performative and
yeah,
so back and forth and self-correcting. And
and
but
spontaneous.
when you have a written record, so to speak, there is more
Yeah,
pressure to be perfect.
yeah. There's a higher responsibility because you have the opportunity to revise it
Yes.
and check it and edit it and grammarly search it and put it
Mhm.
through ChatGPT and have
Mhm.
you have all those opportunities. And if you don't do it, it's like in college, right? If you submit a first draft of an essay, your teacher is going to read it and go, okay, right away, it's written poorly,
Yeah.
and that's going to affect your mark
So,
because it's clear you didn't take the time to revise it. So there's
so
a much higher responsibility.
as a writing teacher, then the obvious question is, how are you dealing with ChatGPT? How is that
It's a great.
enhancing or not your whole existence as a writing teacher?
I'm not entirely sure. I have a suspicion it's destroying my business.
Ah,
The number of student clients I've had in the last 6 months has fallen off dramatically. And I don't really know why. It's possible I'm just a bad coach and nobody wants me, and the word is out that I'm a phony.
that's
Uh,
doubtful.
or it's inflation has limited their ability and their disposable income to spend on a coach. Or now I don't believe it's the academic cycle, because usually in the autumn I've been very busy as students go back to college. The one thing I can point to that's sort of on the scene recently has been ChatGPT. So
Mhm.
I've had a few conversations with professors and teachers, high school teachers and university professors, and they've said, yeah, they're all using it. And I heard up to 70% are using it in a form of direct plagiarization, just having ChatGPT write for them.
Mhm.
And it's noticeable.
Mhm. How
And
is it
there's another
noticeable?
percentage that are, sorry,
How is it noticeable?
in comparison to, for example, to handwritten essays or short paragraph assignments they do in class, spontaneously written things that any astute teacher gets in the first couple of classes now,
Yeah.
even in graduate school, because
Mhm.
they want a baseline to compare ChatGPT. And
Mhm.
very quickly, if you're an experienced teacher of any kind of writing, you can identify a person's particular voice and style from a short piece of writing. And if they submit something that's ChatGPT originated, it'll be very different in tone, in voice, compared to in the past where, let's say you had a handwritten sample, one paragraph, and a student 2 months later submitted a research paper they've labored on in document form. Even though it's edited and polished and maybe grammar checked with Grammarly, it'll still be their writing, and
Mhm.
you'll still hear that voice. You'll
Mhm.
still recognize their personality and their voice in there, and that's not happening in about apparently about 70% of the time.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's affected the number of students I have right now. It's a possibility. I don't really have a means of determining that.
Mhm.
So it may be affecting my work that way. The students I do have, a couple of them have, magically produced essay practice assignments that are clearly not their writing.
So you've asked them about that and
Oh, I call them on
they've
it
come
immediately.
clean? Yeah.
I said, that's not your writing.
Yeah.
And I'll put the onus on them to prove that it is.
Right.
because I can tell right away.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm not a teacher there to grade them. So I want to encourage them to realize I'm there to help teach them skills and advance their abilities. If you're going to use ChatGPT, stop paying me. You don't need me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have no hesitation to stop that in its tracks, because our relationship is pointless if they do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still experimenting with ChatGPT, Andrea. I'm not sure how to. I don't want to deny its existence, and I don't want to avoid it. I want to see if there's ways. If there is ways. If there are ways.
Yeah. There you go. That's great.
Right?
Yeah.
I do that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
If there are ways that I can use it to help my students, then I'm completely open to it. I just haven't figured that out yet. I do suspect, though, that there is a movement where students feel like, I don't need to pay an expensive writing coach to help my writing when I can just get ChatGPT to either A, write it for me, or B, you can copy and paste your first draft into it and say, correct it.
Yeah.
Or, add missing ideas, or, give me a grade on this, or tell me the flaws. I don't know how effective ChatGPT is at doing that, but why would you need a writing coach?
This makes me think about kind of, I don't know if, you think about writing as this invention that began when humans started to etch symbols into rocks to communicate, sort of create a record of I was here, for example. Mm-hmm. And then over time, developing into characters that mimic language, I guess, or represent what we were doing orally. And now we've come through all kinds of wonderful written artifacts through history. And now we've come to a point where we produce language, we are speaking, we articulate thoughts in our minds and we speak them. And is the need for writing, now we're getting to a point where knowing how to compose our thoughts on paper looks as if this will become a craft or an art form or a skill that we no longer need. But I always think about you and your thoughts on that connection between thinking and writing, and how that is so important for human expression in a clear and cogent way.
I think so. I think learning how to write trains you how to think.
Yeah. So this is can you talk about that a little bit? That's so relevant to the relevance of knowing how to be a good writer.
Yeah. And I think also it's an open question, right? If writing helps us think, and that's why we train in writing, that's why high school kids write essays, that's why ESL, EAL, EFL students learn how to write essays in English, it's because we want them to think in English and ultimately be able to produce it in a more cogent way. Do they need that going forward when there's going to be AI to do the writing for you? Is writing just an academic evaluating tool now? That would seem wasteful.
Yeah.
Like, teach students how to write so they can pass tests and pass school so they can get a job that doesn't involve writing. So all of that writing is just a way of grading them. For me, that's incredibly wasteful. I don't know if we're heading that way, but I fear that we are doing some things that seem like it. Mm-hmm. I think here's how I feel about writing. Like, you talk about writing in the historical sense. Writing is immortality. Mm-hmm. It has always been historically, it had been the key to immortality. Shakespeare is dead, but we still read his works and see them performed, and his name is always attached to them. So we're always mentioning Shakespeare, and the curious will look at his life, and he lives on in his writing. In the past, that was one of the few ways to do that. Music creation, the arts were a way of, or writing a tome of some kind, a book, was a way of keeping your ideas alive even after you're dead. Nowadays, there are a variety of ways to do that. You can make a video, you can appear in a movie, all these things. Storytelling in general preserves you for immortality. But so much of that is now digital, and digital can be taken away very quickly. I had a power failure this week. For 2 days, my power was out, and I was completely denied access to digital. So I had to go to the library eventually. Never mind heating, food, microwave, all that stuff. But it was a reminder that all of that can be taken away. Just like I've collected DVDs and videos in the past, physical media, and a lot of the films I've collected are not available on any streaming platform. And if they were, when that streaming platform, when they're licensed to show it expires, that movie's gone.
Yeah.
So I think we've de-emphasized writing because we've been tickled by all the novelties, the digital stuff, social media, video, YouTube, all this stuff. But I hope we will cycle back to writing, because there's an incredible power in reading someone's thoughts in an intimate fashion, opening a book, reading. You're sharing someone's thoughts alone, intimately, and that person can be dead. And for those people out there who feel a compulsion to write, as I do, I can't stop writing. Part of it is driven by a desire to leave something behind me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I answered that question, but
Well,
I still think writing's important.
yeah, for the record, the record. I do think so as well. And I think that, just the act of writing notes when you don't want to forget something is one aspect of it. But this is a concept that seems to be difficult for some of our students to understand when it comes to writing as a tool for thinking.
Yes.
And so when they write their essays, they seem to be writing because Paul told me to write an essay about how to bake a pie. And so I'm very focused on being grammatically correct and using, I like to call $10 words, big words. And it's all a mumble jumble of random thoughts.
Yes.
Not really seeing the connection between using it as a tool for clear thinking.
Yeah.
Right. It's the thinking first, then the writing.
Yeah. I think that works in a loop, right? Think, write, think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to the core issue here is writing and thinking and that connection. I had this conversation very, very recently with a student, and they had been through a language school program, and at each level learned a different kind of essay.
Right.
Compare and contrast, argument, process essay. And they didn't know why they learned it. And so we had that conversation. I said, you learned all those things because those type of essays are taught separately, so you can focus on that particular style and get a grip on it. But the truth is, you can combine all those types of essays into a larger essay once you've mastered each type. They're not necessarily used discretely, they're used together, but you have to learn them separately. It's like learning to play a sport. You learn how to do the forehand in tennis, and you learn to use the backhand. In the game, you use all of it. And I reminded them that each of those type of essays reflects a type of logic that we use every single day of our life. Compare and contrast essay. Well, that's like shopping. I see 2 pairs of shoes. Which ones do I want? Well, these are more expensive, while on the other hand, these are cheaper. Meanwhile, these are a name brand, whereas these are a no-name brand. However, this looks like a stronger material. So you make a choice based on the pros and cons. Process essay. Every day someone asks you, how do I do something?
Right.
How do I make the soup? How do I get to blah, blah? Those are processes. Never mind in business. How do we launch the new ad campaign? Well, we make a flow chart, a process. Argument. We use argument a dozen times a day to express our opinion or to change someone's mind away from their opinion. If you can't do that, you won't go far in life because you won't get what you want. You'll get what everyone else wants because they can make a stronger argument. All of those represent human logic. And when you learn to write those kind of essays, you are given the time nobody ever gives you in speech to organize your thoughts. And the teacher will give you feedback on what elements of your thoughts and ideas are missing. And you go back and you put them in. And then you've developed an essay with a fully elaborated on idea. And if you can do that in writing, you can do it in speech.
And then that naturally follows to how it used to be done is you would defend your argument. You would stand in front of a panel, and then because you've had the time to write it out, think it through, then you could articulate that through speech.
Yeah, you know, the tradition of oration, staying in front of an audience and delivering a verbal essay. People still do that. That's what a TED Talk is. That's what a business presentation is. It's an essay delivered verbally and visually. In fact, when I teach students how to make presentations, I said, write an essay first.
So it's the same. Sorry,
it's the same thing. Yeah,
but I can see someone throwing into chat. What's going to be really the skill is writing great prompts. That's going to be the new a prompt expert. But writing a prompt into chat. I want to do a TED Talk on how to bake a pie, just for a very simple example. And chat will give it to you. You'll print it out and then you'll memorize it.
Yeah.
Because you haven't gone through the process of thinking through how to explain this. And I can see that happening and people having that little disconnect between thinking something through and it's almost like performing it, like memorizing lines without doing the script analysis.
Yeah.
You know, anybody can memorize lines and perform something, but an actor who does the work and finds the layers and the little nuggets in the script related to emotion and
pieces of their own life, right?
Yes.
Connecting their own experiences.
Yes, and recognizing what kind of conflicts are there and what kind of subtext I need to be using in order to really get my point, or what intentions do I have to reach my objectives in this scene, and all of the work that actors do. But if you're not an actor and you're just throwing things into AI and missing a step really of being able to genuinely and authentically relate your thoughts that are artificial because now you're memorizing. You know what I'm saying? That I can see some kind of disconnect there, and
absolutely
less emphasis on the value of thinking something through writing.
And the ideas won't be yours, but at the same time,
but
when
they
you
kind
perform
of are
it,
yours.
You're owning them.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, like, if you do a performance like a TED Talk, or if you submit an essay, either of which were written by ChatGPT and not you, that's your immortality. It's a new kind of phony. You've just committed to posterity. You've just committed to the record something that's not your idea, something that you might agree with, but you didn't write, you didn't think it through.
Well, you wrote the prompt for it.
Okay. This
is going to be something that, a student would come back with. So you've written a really detailed prompt, but I don't, I'm just thinking about this off the top of my head about.
I think there'll be a period like a walk of shame where they realize what they've done there'll be a generational walk of shame where they go, oh yeah, I just committed to posterity and my immortality, something that wasn't authentic to me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a new kind of phony. It's like the big shoulder pads of the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who wore them looks back and goes, oh my God, I can't believe I did that.
Yeah.
This is the new thing. You're committing to the record something that you may not be proud of later.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once a generation does that with ChatGPT, it'll adjust itself in the culture, I think.
And that's the thing too. It's new again, something new, something that's being just completely, overused and kind of
novelty.
It's novelty. And then, it'll be interesting. I'm very excited about technology and how it evolves and how we use it.
And it always changes. As you said, it evolves. So what we have now is not the final thing. Mm-hmm. It is a moment of novelty. Mm-hmm. And so we have to recognize what we're doing right now. Everything is experimental. And I would encourage people to experiment with it. But going back to, again, this sense of this idea of the record, whether it's your academic record or your personal record, keep in mind this experimentation is going on the record. And you should ask yourself, is this a genuine expression of who I am at this moment? Or is it just something I needed to submit to pass a test? Mm-hmm. And I think this all comes, the problems with ChatGPT, whether they're in our private coaching businesses or in schools, the problems come back to the education systems for emphasizing tests and quizzes and scores so much that people are willing to submit something that's not theirs.
Oh, that's a whole other realm of.
If the education system didn't value the score and teachers and parents didn't value that score so much, people would be happy to submit things that were flawed but authentic.
Well, this is another thing a student asked me the other day is so on a CELPIP test, they get the highest level is 12. They got a 7 on speaking and decided to contest it and asked for a review. And they got an 8 when they did that. And knowing that there are 3 or 4 individuals who assess one speaking, one recording,
right?
Student, isn't the integrity and validity already there with 3 or 4 people listening? But you have to, and then I couldn't justify. I couldn't explain to my student, well, why did I get a higher score? After I submitted it, did I get a higher score? I don't know how that works. So anyway, it's so subjective, speaking and writing. And
even with a strident, a really strict system with rubrics and everything, there's still people evaluating them and there's subjectivity there.
And that's why evaluating speaking and writing seems a little crazy to me. In a grading system.
Yeah.
Like
it's not precise.
And I don't know how else we can, there's, formative assessment where you are encouraging students to build on their successes and not grading them. I think that's one of the only ways that I've heard of how to grade something or, without imposing kind of.
Ultimately, I think too, once they get into a language use culture, let's say Canada, where they're going to use English, they'll be graded by their peers. They'll be graded by the jobs they get and accomplish. Right. So even if they had a high score on a CELPIP test and they get their PR and they get a job, they can't succeed in the job if their English remains at a low level. They just won't.
Well, that's it. Yeah. Like some of our students who graduated with whatever they needed at our school that we were at, and then they went into VFS, into the acting program, and they were lost. Yeah. They had the grade required to get into VFS, but once they were there, it was a whole new. I mean, on paper, they look great, but when it comes to communicating, it was very, very challenging for this student to
And I
work.
think we shouldn't lose that in our society, in our work culture, right? The results have to be there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we should, not that we are, but I don't think we should, regulate that out, because language is a tool for social interaction,
Well, that's
including
the thing
work.
too. That's why I find it, because it's, it's a skill. It's not an academic subject. It's a skill
That's
that
right.
you train in, and you're
It's something you
always
do.
learning, and it never ends. So putting a grade on it, like students would say, "Oh, I reached the advanced level." Okay, well, that's,
What does that
you
mean?
memorize some grammar and some vocabulary. Are you going to remember that next week? Like, are you going to be able to use? So that's why it's so, having these levels and grading systems for language learning
Yeah.
is not really, it's a false confidence that we're giving students when they say, "Oh, you've reached the intermediate level." And
Yeah.
they think I never have to go to beginner again. I'm done
That's
with,
right.
because the name beginner sounds low, right? So, but learning language is always revisiting the beginner level. How many of our students still don't, conjugate the third person? Like, it's just, they don't, it's a fossilized error that wasn't encouraged to review. It's a
Yeah.
cyclical. It's not.
That's right. There was I had a friend who was a philosopher, and he was really a proponent of a certain theory called integral consciousness.
Mm,
And and what it proposed, I think I have a book somewhere, but it proposed a really interesting model of human evolution and development in terms of intellect. And he pointed out that it's not a line. It's not like we invented the wheel and that led to this and that led to this and that led to whatever, or we invented the alphabet and that led to writing and then the printing press. It's not linear, because we don't leave the old stuff behind.
yeah.
It's more like a spiral in 3 dimensions,
Yes.
where as you evolve and advance, you're pulling up what you have before, even if you're not aware of it, right? So, for example, we grew up in an era where we weren't aware of the printing press invention. It was invented hundreds of years ago, but it remains part of our life because we are looking at the printed word constantly or reading books. It remains with us. The impacts of that and the knowledge we got from it remain with us, even if we're not the generation of that advancement. And language is like that. You don't leave beginner level behind. You don't pass the beginner level quiz on future tense and then never use it. I had this question just this morning, Andrea. This person said, "I don't understand future present perfect." I said, "Do you understand present perfect?" "Oh, totally. That's easy." I said, "Well, push it into the future." Really? Because they learned these things at discrete intervals.
Yeah.
They think they are new and different grammars. And they're not. They are building blocks that are just, shifted through time with one word, will.
Mm-hmm.
I have studied English. By next year, I will have studied English. You're just pushing the same logic into the future. So you're adding an element.
Mm-hmm.
But our education systems tend to teach them discreetly and not integrate them, not bring up beginner concepts, there's no integration.
Yeah.
Right? And the students continue to think like that. They learn and master the process essay, throw it in the garbage once they've passed, and now they go and learn the argument essay. Once they learn that, they throw it in the garbage and never go back to it again.
Yeah.
Then they go to college, then they go to law school, and now they're a lawyer and they don't know how to present an argument. Or they're in business and they can't argue for adopting a new product. Go and review your argument essay, because that's the key. So you're right, it's skills. And I think the emphasis on testing is really being detrimental to the integral learning of language.
Of the English language learner, for sure, or any language learning curriculum that is based on a grading or level system is instilling this false sense of security in And I'm sure the students feel this and think this too. But there's a seduction in reaching a level, and that sort of capital that comes, that sense of social capital that comes with reaching the level. And that's how we think as humans, right?
Yeah.
And applying that to other areas is, fine, because that's human nature. But language learning it's an ocean of ripples.
Yeah.
And I've understood this more and more as I've been teaching and working with students, and apply it to myself as much as anybody else.
It brings me to a question about what we do privately with our private students, because we exist outside of that kind of structured level-based education. I have, for example, a student who is operating at what would be called an intermediate level, and I have an ongoing relationship with him, coaching him through his English. And I give him lots of opportunity to communicate because he's in a country where he can't use it, but he's in a business where he occasionally is asked to use it with international clients. So he needs a lot of confidence. He needs a lot of spoken fluency. But there are problems he has with his grammar, his structure, his pronunciation that are clearly intermediate or beginner level things. So periodically I interject mini lessons and say, hey, let's take a pause here and let's look at what you just said, because it's emblematic of a pattern. So let's microscope that and look at it, and let's dig down into the beginner level stuff you may have learned before, but let's put it up to the surface, address it, and review it, because even though you learned it 3 years ago, you're still doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that's a value to our coaching clients.
Yes.
But what do you do
when you so much?
How do we approach this? Because we are the living alternative to the level system. We don't have levels.
Yeah.
We don't have tests. I have no tests. I give feedback on what they produce. Is that enough, do you think? Do you ever feel like it's not enough?
No, I think that's validation. And I don't think students get enough of that. It's like, eating, I don't know, something you're addicted to, right? You're addicted to grades. You get an A, it's a real rush. But then you're searching for the next hit. And with feedback, you're getting a consistent validation. And I think that's what people are looking for, that a validation on an ongoing basis, not just reaching a goal and hitting it and then moving on to the next one, but not even, I guess we have goals that we want to reach, but I don't know how to articulate this. It's more of a gentle sort of goal reaching. Like we get there and go, okay, good. We've written the email to a doctor. Okay, now let's move on to the next thing and write an email to your friend. And it's just not, I don't celebrate milestones as much as I celebrate the little discoveries along the way. Like I'm always very excited when something small happens, and not giving the big high five on goal setting necessarily.
Do you think feedback is more like long-term satisfaction that's harder to feel than the short-term instant gratification of a grade? The grade says, hey, you're a good person, you got an A. The feedback makes you a better person, or let's say a better writer or speaker.
Yeah, and you participate in that too. There's a conversation that happens in formative feedback than my assessment of you. Oh, you got an A. That's all I want to know. Thanks. Bye. Gone.
Right.
Yeah. Now you did really well in this, and I want you to keep it up. and maybe build on it. And it's sort of a ongoing conversation. And they go, oh, why? What do you think? I go, well, maybe if you're in this situation, you might need to think about your intonation and how you express yourself in this way or that way. I mean, it could be in any context, but I like the conversation of a formative assessment that happens. It's more of a adventure, you know?
It's probably something they'll remember much more than the grade. They'll remember the conversation you had
Well,
where you gave them.
Well, don't people, there's an expression that I very much take to heart about, can't remember who said it, or people will always remember how you made them feel, not what you said.
Yeah.
And I think that is so true, especially
And
for
will
teachers.
will they ever remember grades?
Yeah.
The grades just get them to another point. It's just functional.
Well, I did very well in university, grade wise, but has anyone seen those grades again? Does anyone? No, no one. I don't show my grades. They don't ask to see my grades.
Yeah,
Nobody
they're now
does.
irrelevant.
Yeah.
You graduated and you got through that grade dated process with the grades, but now the grades are completely irrelevant and forgotten. But the skills you learned from the feedback and the let's say the training, those are integrated into your being right now. You use them.
Yeah.
And whoever helped you achieve them, you remember that person.
And pay it forward. It's having mentors. It's a mentorship mentality. And you learn from your mentor, and then you pass on what you learn and you become the mentor. And then it's a beautiful thing, a human thing, authentic, true passing of knowledge.
I don't remember any grade I got in high school.
Yeah.
I went to university not long ago, so I do remember those grades pretty clearly. But what I remember from high school was one teacher found singled out something I wrote for an assignment and read it to the class and described this student, he didn't mention my name, as very talented writer we'll be hearing about at some point. And that made my life, because even 30 years later, when I had long given up any writing, it nagged at me and brought me back to writing.
See, that person has no idea that the effect that you can have on someone, it
was like a North
magical.
Star that I ignored for 30 years, but then I rediscovered, and it changed everything for me. And by the way, I did reach out to that. I located that teacher and told them.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, now retired, and he was very appreciative. He said, oh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
But he did vaguely remember that thing. It was a pretty unique thing that I wrote. Different, not good, but just unusual.
I had the exact opposite experience happen to me in high school, where a counselor told me that based on my grades in grade 10, which weren't stellar, I'll never forget the words. She said, "You're not university material. You'll never go to university. So let's get you enrolled in typing class." And because I was 16 or 17, I was like, oh, okay. I thought she knows, she's a teacher. I immediately felt in my inside like crying, and I'm such a failure. And university became even more of that golden, unattainable thing. And other people who went there were just, way
the special
beyond.
ones.
And I immediately, for the next 10 years or so, didn't even consider that I could ever go to university or ever do what was in my heart that I knew I wanted to do. But she threw the water on that fire, and it was out for years and years.
Terrible.
My confidence, my sense of self. The things I pursued were mediocre. I never dared to dream, so to speak.
Yep.
And it took a long time. It took travel. It took meeting some really wonderful, supportive people where I could experiment and dip my toe into this not so exclusive world. I mean, it's a place, it's not, you don't have to be, university material, whatever that means.
Whatever that means. Like, well, I mentioned a teacher who said something nice about my writing. Shortly thereafter, people told me the opposite about everything else, including the school guidance counselor. And they were right. They weren't wrong, because my grades were terrible. And they told me, what you should hope for is to go up the road and get a job at the factory.
Yeah.
And I was
Based
like,
on grades, though, right? Based
Yeah.
on grades, not
Yeah.
on the individual, not seeing. I think that's why Montessori is so. I don't know much about Montessori method, but I think it's related to what we've been talking about, is really encouraging students to and explore their interests and excel in areas that interest them, and find ways to, be
Yeah.
highest potential, reach their highest potentials.
My understanding is Montessori is a method where they encourage children to explore and experiment and play, because there's wisdom in the play.
Right.
And in high school, certainly, there's no way for the people in power and positions of guidance to know what you're good at, because they don't let you play. They channel you through the academics.
Mm-hmm.
The only people who can see you at play and really identify what you're passionate about, because that's in play. It's not going to be in school.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody might aspire to be a doctor, but they may not be necessarily passionate about chemistry class.
Right.
Right? But maybe that kid playing doctor, pretending to be a doctor based on what they saw on a TV show, maybe that's an indicator of a passion.
Mm-hmm.
But the only people that are in a position to know, and this is where teens often feel so alienated, is that the people that are in a position to know what you're really, what's really you, what's really totally Andrea, is your family. Because they see you play, they see you choose your favorite TV show, they see what you asked for Christmas present. And but the problem is, a lot of parents don't realize those are very powerful indicators of what you should be devoting your life to. Because when it comes to time for a teenager to think about career, they are staking their life on that. They're going to devote the rest of their life to a career path. And that should be something. We know the cliches of do what you love and all that stuff.
Right.
Whatever that thing is that you're going to stake your life on, it better be something that you are willing to stake your life on at a deep core level. Children already know that.
Yeah, we knew that watching Mr. Rogers and Mr.
Right?
Dress Up, like just the fascination that we had with what they were conjuring before our eyes, and
when a child goes out to play, they make a very free choice.
Oh yeah.
They don't care about how they look. They don't care about how much money they make. They don't care about what mommy and daddy think, because mommy and daddy are back in the living room and you're out in the yard playing or the park playing. That's where you're going to make the choices that are, the most intrinsic parts of you.
Yeah.
And so many times nobody's paying attention. And those things are where the great wisdom of your calling or your passion, that's where they are.
Right, kernel of it, like something is ignited there, a little something that might not be the thing that you're exploring in that moment, but transmutes. Is that the correct word? Transmutes.
Yeah, transmutes. Yeah, it's a good word, actually.
Transmutes.
So I think Montessori is a system where they don't care about grades and academics. They're paying attention to what the kids play. Does one child make something out of clay and sticks? Oh, there's a creative element there. And the other child, plays with them and maybe makes a little table and pretends they're in a store. Oh, maybe there's an entrepreneurial spirit there.
Yeah.
There's all this, there's all these indicators about a child's tendencies and their personality. I think most schools don't pay attention to that stuff. They're looking at your grades and telling you you're not university material, or you have a great future in a factory. Yeah.
Which is okay. I mean, that's nothing.
For sure.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No. I objected to it because that wasn't what I was thinking about myself. Yeah. And when I heard it, I thought, oh, that's what you think of me. You have no idea. And that's why it hurt me. to be told that's what I was
Well,
capable of.
I was enrolled in typing class, so I actually ended up making that my identity. And I ended up pursuing after high school, jobs as a receptionist or office jobs that I knew I didn't quite fit in there. And I did it for years, but I always felt like this isn't really me, but this is what Mrs. Russell told me to do.
Yep.
And I was fitting myself. I was a shape that didn't fit into the shape I was trying to fit into. It was uncomfortable for a long time.
Tell me if I'm wrong in this assumption, because I think we have this in common. The great trick of that is that you're also very intelligent and highly teachable. So when you go into that field and environment that's really not you, you excel at it, because that's what Andrea does. Andrea excels at stuff.
Yeah. Well, I didn't excel at it, but I did it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
I did. I mean,
you kept your job.
It was for many, many years. And I did different
positions. And you adapt and you earned a living at it.
Yep.
And
I did.
That's what I'm talking about. The trick. The trick is all that stuff reinforces it. And you go, yeah, I guess I can make a go of this. And worse, people start asking you to, hey, I'd like to promote you to this, or hey, come and work at my company. And suddenly everyone's looking at you as that thing.
Yeah.
Forgetting that maybe you're capable of being good at something other than just one thing, because you're smart and teachable.
And thank you for my parents, because they always said, just do it. Just go out there and do it. So I was kind of put myself in this typing place. And then I was encouraged to just go apply at Langara, go apply at UBC, go into the theater. And I was scared, but I did it anyway, because I had such a great support system. And I was uncomfortable. I learned that you have to learn by doing. It's going to be a risk and it's going to be uncomfortable. But like we said at the beginning of this conversation, you rarely get the reaction that you fear. Yes. People want to help. If they see you falling, they will pick you up 99% of the time. It's always good to risk and just do it. Make a fool of yourself, because no one really is going to remember it. Everyone's thinking about themselves anyway. Yeah. How am I reacting in this situation? And they're not even going to remember what you did. So
that's a good lesson for all of our students that are struggling.
Yes.
Whether it's for their CELPIP test, as we started with today, or academic stuff.
Life.
Just don't be afraid. Just produce, get feedback, clean it up, fix it.
The older we get, the more we realize how all of this is so fleeting.
Oh.
That it's imperative that you try and take risks. You've got to.
Yeah. Take risks. Theme of the day.
Theme of the day.
Well, Andrea, maybe we should bring to a close our most recent staff meeting.
Yes.
On that note.
Love our staff meetings. This is what we would talk about in the room.
Yeah.
This was fun. I really enjoyed our chat.
And the clock would be ticking and it's like time to go back to class. We're having a great conversation, but
time
now
to
it's
go
back to class.
Yeah. Yeah.